Tim Tucker is an author, speaker and Africa Development Director for the Message Trust. Of course, friends of the radio station, the Message Trust, and Tim is as well. Welcome. But in August 2016, Tim's life and whole family was devastated by the sudden death of his wife, Laura. Tim was left as a single parent to 3 young children. Since then, he's become somewhat of an expert when it comes to grief, and he tours the world to offer support and ministry to people who may be suffering. Hi Tim, great to have you with us.
Gareth, great to be here.
Now just tell us, so you've flown in, haven't you? Not just now, you have been in the UK for about a week or so. You've not stopped. You've been here, there and everywhere.
So I live in Cape Town, South Africa, but I'm part of the Message Trust, and obviously we have our headquarters in Manchester. And so came in about a week ago. My family live in Birmingham, spent a couple of days down there. And then we've just had 3 days of kind of our annual, it's not quite a conference, it's a couple of days of prayer and vision casting. And then yesterday, a gathering of our global leaders. Now the message is on 4 continents, so it's really exciting. And I'm here. And actually your studio over the road from where I lived as a teenager in Stalybridge. So it really is a bit of a pilgrimage for me.
Do you ever lose that love for where you're brought up from? So you are a well-travelled man, aren't you?
Yeah.
Did you come through the doors here and think, wow, my childhood home?
What a question. You know, I was driving from Ashton and drove past an old friend's house and then down past Stamford Park and coming in the old routes I used to walk as a scally back in the day, and then thinking about what Staley Vegas was like in the 90s before it was even called Staley Vegas, and then up the road I'd go and watch Stalybridge Celtic. Absolutely sentimental, absolutely. Yeah, you never lose that kind of formation, the place that formed us into who we are. Yeah,
it's very funny because of course we broadcast nationally, so a lot of the places you mention I know and people listening will know as well, but other people will be going, what? And I wonder how many people are actually searching now of what these places are that you just mentioned.
Yeah. But and you said now you broadcast internationally, mate. I listen to you in Cape Town, so you have
You're
a global audience, don't you? I'll be that one.
And you obviously hear us commenting about the weather and thinking, thank goodness I'm in Cape Town. Is that how it works?
Yeah, something like that.
Thought so. So let's go back to 2016. You were living in South Africa, a regular family, 3 young children, and then your wife Laura sadly died.
Yeah.
Pick it up from there. So I don't quite know how to ask about this.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. What happened?
Yeah. I mean, the strap line I use is I was suddenly facing a future I didn't choose, didn't even imagine. And I mean, you call me a grief expert. It's not a title at all. I would want to, because who wants to be that? Who wants to have to go through something that is so unexpected? Laura we married in 2000. She was South African. I was British. I was a youth worker in South Africa and then did sports ministry for many years. And we had 3 children. And then and Laura had some health issues, but never anything life-threatening. And so, you know, June 2016, she had an episode. I was called by friends. She'd been at a friend's house. She was rushed to hospital. They did a whole barrage of tests, and she got the all clear. And then August 2016, my brother and his family were coming over from the UK. We had a long-awaited planned holiday with all the cousins, you know, our kids all together and going down the coast. And the day before we were due to go away, Laura had been feeling a little bit unwell again, some migraines, but she bravely made the journey. I think that was 15th of August. We went down to a beautiful coastal place, a Christian guest farm called Carmel, by one of my favorite beaches called Victoria Bay. And 16th of August, we were on the beach, middle of winter, but beautiful sunny day. You say the contrast. And Laura not feeling 100%, but watching the family enjoying themselves. We even had a walk along the promenade talking about the future. Next day, 17th of August, my brother and I went out to the shops to get some stuff for breakfast, came back. We thought we were just going to hit repeat, get back on the beach. My sister-in-law met me and said, you know, Laura's had some kind of episode. She's in tremendous pain, headaches. And I said, let's just get her to hospital. That's what we had to do last time. By the time we got to hospital, the ambulance took too long to come, so we bundled her in the car. By the time we got to hospital, she had passed out. They took her into the emergency room, and right there and then, it was like I was on a set of, Casualty or ER or House, and everything's going on around you, because you could tell that there was a crisis, but they can't tell me what's going on at that moment in time. Eventually, the doctor came to me and said, "We think she's had an aneurysm in her brain." They said, "We need to airlift her to Cape Town. We can't treat it here. But we're just trying to stabilize her." We tried to stabilize her and had to resuscitate her because she crashed. And he said it's 50-50. It's touch and go. And right then you're like, it's beyond anything you can imagine. And so, during the course of that day, the doctors were trying their best, but it became increasingly apparent that, barring a miracle, Laura was not going to recover. I had to go home later that night. They said, just go home, get some rest, and tell my children, what was happening. 2:00 in the morning, they phoned me back, went back to the hospital, and they said to me, "You just need to prepare by the morning. The doctors will recommend switching off her life support machine, because she was beyond the point of any form of recovery." And I was there that night. And as a Christian, I said one simple prayer. I'd been a believer in God since a child, and I said, "Man, God, everything I've believed since childhood, it better be true. I need it to be true that somehow I can't get through this. But I just need the help and strength that only you can give." And I guess that was the start of a journey that I never really imagined from that time on.
And you had to have that conversation with your children that no parent should ever have to do, where you say that your mummy's not here anymore.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I think kids are incredible. Obviously, they were aware of the seriousness in the morning. And so, they were the ones who actually asked the question, how serious. My eldest was 12, 13, turning 13, 11, and the youngest was 8. And I often say that, I don't like to tell their story on their behalf. In some ways, their story is still being written, coming into adulthood and so on. But what I do say is that we didn't get that big miracle of their mum being restored to health. But there were a number of little miracles, because the very fact that we were with family, their cousins were there, my brother and his wife, and actually others were able to gather in those following days, and they were just surrounded by people who loved them. And the fact that it happened in that way enabled them to feel the security of the broader family, even while I was in absolute mess and in crisis. And so, in their own way, they were able to express, yes, their grief and their loss, but they felt secure. And I think that's what helped them get through that initial phase. And I was fortunate in the sense that the chairman of my board came across. He was one of the people, Andy Hawthorne, who I report to, and they were both like, "Tim, you're just going to take it off as long as you need to settle your family." The other factor was they were all we homeschooled. Laura, their mum, was their teacher as well, and so their whole life was revolved around this incredible woman who was investing. But I also was able to say to them, you've had more love from your mum in your life than many have in a lifetime. And as we reflected on those sorts of things, we saw that was true. And so, I see glimpses of Laura in them every day, even though it hasn't and still isn't that easy for them. Yeah.
It has to be said that if you were looking for a prayer warrior, Andy Hawthorne is the one to be there during the difficult times, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things is, the big lesson to learn is, yes, we have faith. I'm a Christian, but we're not immune from suffering. I knew that, following Jesus was not a get out of jail free card. Rather, the promise of the Bible was, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he promises then to be with us in that place. And the conversation I had with God the following couple of days was, I said to God, I'm really struggling, but I can't turn you into my enemy. I'm not going to throw the toys out of my cot, but I've got to know that you're with me in this. And the words I felt he said to me was, Tim, I'm not your enemy. I'm your ally. I felt that God said, I hate death as well. This was never his intent for his humanity, for a 38-year-old mother of 3 to die in the prime of life. That was never his intent. And yet we live in a world where that does happen. And so the question is how then do we respond in that place of pain when the rubber hits the road in terms of our faith? And I felt God say to me, I'm your ally. I'm the one who's going to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. We'll get through this together. We've got the same enemy, Tim. That enemy is called death. This wasn't his intention. And so if we stand shoulder to shoulder, we can get through that together. So that, I think, was, certainly in those early stages, just something I was able to hold on to.
That was my next question, if you blame God for this, because I know people who were really strong in their faith, and something terrible happened, and that faith went.
Yeah.
And if you speak to them, they say, because I don't believe that a God who loved me so much would allow that to happen.
Yeah.
How would you respond to that?
It's a great question. I think what I did feel, obviously there was anger, but I also said to God, I'm jealous. I said, I do believe in heaven. I believe that Laura was a Christian, and I believed that she was at that moment then in heaven, and with God. And that was the faith that I had. But I said, God, I always knew that actually Laura loved you and obeyed you more than me. That's what's she had such a strong faith, and she loved Jesus more than she loved me. But I said, I wanted another 50 years, and so you've kind of taken this from me at the prime, but so I'm jealous in that sense. And I felt that it's almost a funny thing now. It's almost, I felt like God smiled at that and said, I get it, Tim, But at the same time, it's not like he was, like I said, celebrating, oh yes, I've got Laura. And, actually that was not, so I felt this incredible sense of we were in the same battle and that he was my strong support that I needed. If I didn't have, and looking back now, 8 years later, if I didn't have that faith, I really don't know where I'd be. And I think the danger as Christians is we go into two equal and opposite situations. The one is despair. It is possible to fall into despair. And I think the problem with despair is you lose hope. And I think that's when we begin to get our faith we question our faith, we question the goodness of God. And we can lose sight of some of the truth of scriptures, where really the promises of God still stand. So even though we're not immune, there is the promise that he is with us. He does not leave us nor forsake us. And sometimes we have to hold on to those promises. But that doesn't mean we're not sad. And so I had incredible sadness. I cried more than I've ever cried. There was a deep sadness within me. And yet, because I was able to bring that sadness in some ways to God, I struggled to go to church, I struggled to read my Bible, I went through all that stuff. But I didn't lose sight of the fact that I still believed God would bring me through it in some way, in his way. I had no idea what that would look like, but I just had to hold on to that. So a friend of mine said to me, he trusts you to still be faithful even in this time of pain. The opposite response that some Christians have is like they become super spiritual Iron Men. Inside they're falling apart and they're pretty messed up people, but they put on this suit of armor on the outside and they think they're kind of some kind of supernatural spiritual superhero that nothing can touch them and they're kind of untouchable from pain. And I think actually that's just as bad. By kind of going out there and say, oh, praise God, even I can overcome all things through him who strengthens me. And we have all these biblical statements that we make. But inside, we're falling apart and eventually our souls will crumble. So we've got to hold that balance between holding on to the faith and the truth that we have, that Jesus is with us. He is the one who promised to never leave us nor forsake us. And yet the Bible is full of characters who bared their soul out to God, even in anger and pain. But because they brought that pain to God, that didn't become their permanent destination. Rather, it became an avenue through which they could experience what I would say is the miracle, and that is grace. Grace is the thing that gets us through. The grace is the thing that God says, doesn't matter what, it doesn't, it does matter, but in what you say, but in some ways it doesn't matter what you say, because he still loves us just the same. And he is prepared to strengthen us and support us. Because when we go through the the worst that life can throw at us, we can actually discover kind of some of the what some authors say, the kind of the multifaceted layers of grace that otherwise we never would have. And in the moments of in that moment of time, that's not necessarily that comforting, but over time you begin to see it and see, wow, okay, so there was that love of God holding me through this and holding my children and the greater family through this in ways that I could never have imagined. And then you begin to feel grateful. And I think gratitude is a critical component towards finding healing. It's not necessarily that you're happy about what has happened, but I actually started a bit of a gratitude journey, beginning to thank God for 16 years of a faithful wife, the children that we'd had, my wife's crazy sense of humor, the kind of stuff that I could write a list down and say, even though I'm in pain, I can still be grateful.
And you mentioned an interesting thing there. It's all about being genuine with your feelings, isn't it? And what you're going through. Because one of the most damaging things we can do as Christians is to not be honest about how we're feeling. Because that doesn't encourage other people. Yeah. And with your journey, you'll have such an impact because there'll be people who have just gone through what you went through 8 years ago. Yeah. And if they just heard you going, oh, I'm fine, yeah, look, isn't God great? God is great. But with you sharing the fact that actually I couldn't read my Bible for a long time. I couldn't even face going to church. There's something so powerful about that.
Yeah.
So I want to move on to where you are now. Now, you're married to Chrissy.
Yeah.
And you said that it's a shame that she isn't here now because you dabbled in a bit of radio together. So we don't know where that will lead to. But tell us how you met.
So I mean, remarriage, again, one of those things you never anticipate. I reached a point, actually, fairly soon. I was like, my answer when people asked me about remarriage was, I had such a fulfilling marriage with Laura. I'm just leaving it in the Lord's hands. And then as what happens is suddenly you kind of get surprised and bam, you're floored. And that's kind of what happened.
Floored by love.
Yes, exactly. And you know, God redeems pain. I believe redemption is that he buys back our pain and he gives us something good. It's the story of the Bible. Read it from beginning, Genesis to Revelation. If you want to sum up what the story of the Bible is that God takes our pain and it's the miracle exchange that he will give us joy. And it looks different for everybody. There's no recipe for this. There's no kind of like, I can't give people the ABCs, but I do hope my story does inspire to say, whatever someone might be feeling right now, it is possible. You can survive, sometimes just by the skin of your teeth. You get this track record of just surviving, but in that process, you then suddenly realize, wow, okay, this week I'm feeling a little bit better than I did last month. And what is that? You know, and that is actually the process of healing that's going on. So I was floored by this, relationship with Christina. In my mid-40s, suddenly I'm behaving like a teenager again. Christina had never been married. She'd moved to South Africa and was actually working for the Message Trust in 2017. So this was the year after we'd lost Laura. But an interesting thing had happened. She had met Laura once when she was coming out to South Africa with her band. She was in the band 1224, which was part of the Message Trust.
Is that Laura who was in the band?
Christina. Christina okay. was in the band 1224, part of the Message, worked for the Message in the UK.
Which, am I right that 1224... they're the band that Josh Green used to be in.
Yes.
And I always want to call him Ryan Giggs, but it was
Griggs.
Ryan Griggs.
That's right, yeah.
Which, as a Mancunian, I find it so hard to say Ryan Griggs and not Giggs. So we do know them. And I didn't know that is your wife.
That's my wife, Christina.
It is a small world.
Yeah, exactly. So Christina had been with 1224, 7-8 years, touring with Ryan and Josh. They're her brothers. They all came over in 2015 to South Africa. And like I said, she had met Laura on that trip. And our daughter, Erin, our youngest daughter, she loves singing. So Laura had said to Christina, if ever you move back to South Africa, would you consider mentoring Erin? So again, one of those minor miracles in the journey. So lo and behold,
isn't it, that? Out of all the people in the world, out of all the locations, and that's what happened.
Yeah, exactly. And then Christina feels this call. 2017, she moves to South Africa and takes a job with the message. Myself, I'd been on compassionate leave, eventually come back, and she's involved. And so I said to her, do you remember that conversation you had with Laura? Would you kind of more than ever be willing to come and spend some time with Erin? And so what used to happen, because one of the rules I had a few little rules. If you read my first book on this topic, Grief and Grace, I have these three rules in my vulnerability after losing my wife. I said, firstly, I'm not going to have any alcohol in the house. I'm not going to put that temptation in my way. I had a second rule about not watching anything on TV that was more than, in South Africa, it's like a PG-13. I didn't want to risk going into any stuff there that would be unhealthy for me. And the third one was don't spend time with single women. I so I had those three rules. So Christina would come round, hang out with Erin, and that would be my chance to go out. But anyway, as that went on, suddenly I found reasons to stay.
I'll just take the bins out.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll just do the hoovering.
No, I'm cooking dinner for the kids. Don't you just want to stay and have some dinner with us, you know? So yeah,
you old charmer.
Yeah, and that's when all those teenage vibes came back, you know. And so that was really the start of us exploring what a relationship would look like. And I think, you know, again, funny enough, it was my boys that one point then cornered me. Well, late at night, and they said, this Christina's spending a lot of time. What's going on? And I said to them, well, what do you think? I said, well, they said to me, well, does she like you? And they said, well, you better ask her. So that was the kind of the turning point. But yeah, they at that point were very supportive, and they continued to be. But obviously it wasn't easy. But Christina was just remarkable in terms of responding to this, and again, call to South Africa, and now, you know, marrying me. The following year we got married, taking on the 3 children, and now to bring it up to date, and we had a COVID baby, so I had to get back in that saddle again. I never expected.
Sleepless nights.
Yeah, exactly. No. And just to sum up, kind of, I guess all of this is that our baby's name is Faith, because ultimately it was pointing to say, well, you know, you got to have faith in those famous words.
Absolutely.
Because that is what helps us get through the stuff that we otherwise think would swamp us and derail us. And so what I loved about Christina was she entered into our family in such a way that we could still talk about Laura, still honor her, and even share sometimes in the pain and grief that I sometimes still experience, you know? And it's not just always a bed of roses. There's still some vulnerable times. And so she is part of that story now, yeah.
Do you have conversations about Laura with Chrissy? Or is that difficult? Because it's almost in a way, I guess, it's difficult for you because you've got what you could refer to as your old life, is that fair to say, and your new life, but you can't be expected just to forget about that one and go, right, I'm remarried, we've got a new baby, because you'll always have a place in your heart for that old life and Laura. How do you balance that?
I think she's been, I think I've been taking my cues from her, and she's just been very humble in that, and like I said, accepted that I have had that old life, I have those memories. And sometimes, you know, there are memories that I have now that are like anniversaries. I'm the only one who has those memories now because Laura's not there to share. So I sometimes will take, on our anniversaries, I'll take extra time out for myself, and Christina's given permission for that. But then on Laura's birthday, which is actually coming up, we always get to have pancakes as a family because that's something that Laura enjoyed. So we've created these moments, and Christina enters into that. And even with Faith now, we've started telling Faith about Auntie Laura, who was the mother of her brothers and sister.
Wow.
And so I find that that's been really healthy for us. I haven't ever felt unable to have a conversation or to bring some, or for the children to have that as well. But I think it is, again, there's no recipe. I think anyone involved in remarriage, whether that's after a divorce or a death or any kind of, a tragic situation, I think there's no recipe for that. But the thing is to talk about it, to find a compromise, find a middle ground that honors both parties. In that, and if you can do that, and then sometimes you make a mistake or you overstep or you say something inappropriate, then there's great trust to give forgiveness.
Because it can go either way, can't it? I mean, I my friend lost his mum. We're going back about 20 years now. And his dad remarried. And the lady he remarried, they weren't allowed photos of his mum in the house. Conversations, they were really awkward to the point where it was almost like this elephant in the room.
Yeah. And I think that's hard. I mean, I'm so glad it's not like that. And certainly, again, I think our Christian faith is really helpful in this because, and even our vows till death us do part, it's a very important point to say, so I went, the immediate crisis after Laura was died was my faith was we were one, and now I feel broken. You know, I feel like I'm not a complete person anymore. So I needed to rebuild myself first and foremost and find who now Tim is, because I was no longer married to Laura, you know. So at what point do you take off your wedding ring? At what point? Those are the practical things no one talks to you about.
And I'm just thinking, because Laura was the same age that my wife is now, 38. And I don't know if it was like that in your household, but for us, my wife Sam is the she's the rock of the family. She's the one who does the things that I'm useless at, like the making sure that the clothes are ready for school the next day. And if I think too long about the fact that if something happened to Sam, how I'd cope, my heart starts to break because she's so much of an anchor and a rock. So for you, it must have been awful.
It was, and it was in that ways. She was very much the maternal figure, like I said, homeschooling, and so I had to learn to be different. It was a re-education, and I had joked with the kids once a few months after. I said, you know, sometimes it feels like I'm being more mum than dad, you know, and sometimes it feels like I'm being more dad than mum. So we need to come up with a new name. And we realised, well, actually, I'm just being damn mad.
Excellent.
When I'm more dad than mum, or when I'm more mum than dad.
Excellent. But it's nice that as a family, you can talk about these things and joke about it because, you know, your wife, Chrissy, will never want to be or want to replace Laura. But she, I guess, is the woman in the house now who sort of takes that mothering instinct type thing with the whole family.
I think being a stepmom is a hard calling. I'm not going to deny it. That's, you know, it is tough because you don't know, you're always working on where the boundary is. And again, like, I don't want to talk on the kids' behalf. I don't talk on Chrissy's behalf in that sense. So it's a very brave calling. What I would say about remarriage, though, is for me, it's not been a comparison at all. It's a whole new adventure. You actually, when you go to that level of intimacy with a person, you just realize how unique God has made everybody. And so there's never a time when I think any form of comparison, because ever since I committed to pursue Christina to become my wife, at that moment in time, that captured my heart and my mind. And what I think assured Christina was, as a man, I'd been faithful to Laura. I had a good track record in my previous relationship. So that meant she felt she could trust me in my pursuit of her. And God just did a lot of little things that just confirmed that for us, and a lot of beautiful things. And we have Christina has also a very positive view of marriage. Laura and I always had that as well. We're like very pro-marriage. We're not these people that talk bad about it. So hearing about what you and your wife are like now, that's exactly how it should be. And, you know, we should be living in that moment with absolute gratitude that God has made the two one, and you're complementing one another for as long as you both shall live. Yet at the same time, you know, it's remarkable what resilience we can have when it's required. Nothing can prepare you for that moment. But should it ever happen, there will be that depth of resilience. Why? Because of the investment of your wife has made into you all these years, has made you a better man. And that's what I had to realize. Man, I've had Laura's investment into my life has made me a better person. So I lived, you know, in the 90s, we had those terrible bracelets. Well, maybe they're not so terrible, but the What Would Jesus Do bracelets. I changed it and had a what WWLD, what would Laura do? And because I could think about what she would have done in certain situations, I could just apply my mind and manage that. So those are the sorts of things that, unless you've walked the path, it's hard to really understand, except to say there are people like me who have come through on the other side to a certain extent, and we've experienced a richness. It's like we're the soldiers who've been on the front line, who've survived, who've got the scars to show it, but there's like a gravitas that can give others assurance to say that in the battle of life you can still come through standing, and not just standing, you can still be making positive ground.
We'll talk about your new book in a minute, but I want to talk about the first one that you did. So this is called Grief and Grace. It's available in the regular places that you'll get your books. It
is, although currently it's just on Amazon. It's sold out in the UK at the moment. So
which is good.
We're about to do a reprint. So on Kindle if you're looking for it.
So this one is, I guess, the first 6 months after Laura passed.
Yeah.
How long did it take for you to feel that you're in a place to actually be able to even discuss this? Never mind share it with the general public.
Yeah, great question. So I journaled extensively. I've always been a bit of a journaler. I'm not like a diary keeper. I don't do a Dear Diary every day. But whenever I feel there's something significant happening, or a Bible verse or something, I have journaled. So in that 6 months, I wrote a lot. I was processing my thoughts. And then even when I started sharing some of those thoughts with a few people, they said, one day this could be really helpful for other people to hear. So that kind of seed was sown. But I remember in about probably a year after Laura passed, I tried to sit down and write something and suddenly realized way too soon, couldn't do it. But so it was actually after we got married. So in 2019, I again revisited the journals and revisited and started. And this was actually part of, again, the bonding with Christina and I started writing Grief and Grace. And whenever I finished a chapter, I'd read it to Christina for her feedback, kind of our bedtime reading. But because the journal was there, Grief and Grace is very raw. It's honest. It's not trying to give solutions. It's just saying this was what my experience was, and this is how I articulated what I was going through in the different phases in those 6 months. For some people that might be a 5-year process. For me it was a very intense. The 6 months, I said in the book, it felt like multiple years. Every day felt like a battle to get through, and time just seemed to slow down. So I processed a lot of that. Yeah. So when it came to write the book, Grief and Grace, it was actually then quite a quick process. And I remember finishing the last chapter and kind of doing the full stop on the computer and thinking, I've got nothing more to say about this. Wow. You know, everything is.
It was
there.
Almost like therapy for you, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah. So it comes back to that theory of that word redemption. It was redeeming. It was saying taking something bad and enabling it. It was healing for me, but even the thought that this could help even one other person was motivation. And I think that's just. Writing is a little bit how I'm wired. Other people, it might be music or art, or it could be relationships that they're able to invest in, or a course they do. You know, there's things that can be done, I think, that are helpful. But again, you've got to understand how you're wired yourself. What is the thing that can help you process to a greater degree? And certainly the writing was like that for me.
And just share with us on air what you shared with me off air, because I didn't know how to explain it, because you don't get over that kind of thing, do you? Yeah. You used a great phrase.
Yeah. So once someone once said to me once I got remarried, it's great that you've now got over it. And I said, no.
If only you knew.
You don't get over it. You continue to walk through it. And I said, you're navigating. You're navigating.
I love that phrase.
And it has different ebbs and flows as you go through it. And sometimes, I remember at one time, the footballer Christian Eriksen.
Yeah.
And he had that, and things in the World Cup, he collapsed on the pitch. And I was a wreck. Christina was watching the game. She started praying on the TV screen. Actually, Laura's parents were in the house at the time. They were visiting us. But there was something about that image that took me right back to the hospital. And I just went to the kitchen and was bawling my eyes out. Partly, not that I was a great Christian Eriksen fan, partly because the sadness of that situation, but it took me right back immediately to that hospital. And so you can be, the word they use is trigger, isn't it? You can be triggered in those things in such a way that, wow, and that doesn't happen often. But that's part of me navigating what I call, many people talk about the new normal, I say it's the new abnormal. There was nothing, there was so discontinuous to my previous life that it felt I was navigating a new abnormal with all kinds of roads and hills and mountains that I'd never have crossed otherwise. But the way you navigate that stuff is one step at a time, isn't it? You can only cope with the stuff that's in front of you. You can't cope with the things you don't yet know. But I think that's how you build that resilience, because as you get that track record of, wow, I've survived each step at a time, then I can still continue to navigate what I still don't fully understand is going to come next.
So your new book, which this will be available.
That is available, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is called Finding Life After Death, a Biblical Survivor's Guide. So this is, as we say, your new one. Mm-hmm. And I guess this talks about the 6 months and the time after the other book. Is it almost like one that picks up from the other?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it is. I think the idea, I didn't want to write another book. I've said I don't want to be the grief guy. I don't want to be, that's not the name I want. But it's like every time I try and resist it, I feel prompted to do something else. And so it's just, so this book, The Finding Life After Death, I think with the recognition, it's not just about the death through dying. It could be the death of a dream. It could be the death of a marriage. It could be the death of a job. It could be things that happen in our life that we feel we're going to struggle to get over, or to get through. That these things seem insurmountable. So I've written it from the context of my own loss and grief, but drawn obviously less directly from my story, but more into principles that I've learned, as the years then have gone on. And it's written about three sections, the book. The first section, and again, it's like I said, it's a biblical survivor's guide. It is written from an understanding to say that as Christians, actually, we're not talking enough about this stuff. We're not immune. Like I said before, there's no get out of jail free card. It's not a bridge over troubled waters to heaven's doors. And we are the ones, we continue to walk through this stuff. And yet we don't. Sometimes the only time you hear a sermon on death or dying is at a funeral. Mm-hmm. By then it's a bit late. We need to be preparing and building one another up, because in a world where people are struggling with the very concept of suffering, I think the Bible has a lot to say about it. So the book has 3 sections. The first section starts with perspective. What is a biblical perspective on this stuff? And the importance to have that. Believing in God's sovereignty, and understanding what that looks like. So starting there to say that the very lens we look at the problems of life through needs to not start with our experience of those problems, but actually needs to start with the Bible, which I believe is the guidebook through all of this stuff. But then the second section looks at pain and the reality of pain. And what it means to be in pain. So obviously I do draw from my own experience, but also now I guess I've spoken to so many people, because so many people have shared their stories with me. We've done a video series on grief and grace, and I've heard some of these different experiences that people have had, and that it's real. It's horrendous to go through some of this stuff. So acknowledging that, I think, is important. So the second part of the book looks specifically around navigating the pain of the worst that life can throw at you. But then the third section of the book starts to look at purpose, and to say that's the redeeming and even resurrecting. That life can come back out of death. The things that we thought were going to knock us out are actually the things that can make us and the people that God wants us to be. So the third section of the book is really looking at purpose. And in that, I bring a little bit of the Christina story and how that came about, and how my experience of what redemption has looked like. So again, the idea is not necessary to give the ABCs of surviving this, but actually to give a testimony of my experience that can hopefully inspire others as well.
And just before you go, I know it's a typical question that people tend to ask, but it's an important one, this, because there's so many different people who will be watching and listening to this who have maybe lost a loved one recently. Yeah. They're having real grief. What would you say to those people who are in that situation? They're in the real heart of it at the moment.
Yeah. I think what I say to them is, don't overthink it. it's about survival. When you're in that place, it is survival. It is tough. But if you've listened to this radio show, and we've probably talked for more than the 20 minutes you said we were going to talk, you've survived the last half an hour. You've got through another half an hour. If you've got through this last half an hour of listening to the two of us, you can get through the next half an hour. Break it down like that, and that's how I got through it. Even a minute by minute, get that, because that's how you build resilience. And right now, if you're in that painful place, it is about surviving. It's about resilience. You can't make big decisions. They say that, but it's good advice. You can't. I thought of moving back to England with my kids from South Africa, but it would have been a mistake. But I did know I needed a holiday, so I just planned for that. I had something that helped me to motivate me. When I got on holiday, I think I cried the whole time because Laura wasn't there. But it was a mini victory. So surviving minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, those are mini victories. There are other mini victories. Don't take on more than is realistic, but think, what are those mini victories that you need to do? There's a heck of a lot of administration when someone dies, and that can be overwhelming as well, and no one prepares you for that stuff. So just do it one thing at a time. Don't think you can wind up someone's estate and all their best wishes and honor all their friends and do everything. No, right now, cut it right back to what is just essential. Get through the essential stuff. And then the third thing I would say is, so if the first thing is survival minute by minute, the second thing is don't overdo it. Don't be too ambitious with what you accomplish. Recognize that grief limits your capacity. I think then the third thing I would say is don't neglect community. You need people around you. And even if that is, but it's people who you feel are empathetic. They do get it to a certain extent. But you talked about church. And I did try and go to church because I knew I did not, if just to sit at home miserable on my own on that Sunday morning. But my routine was this: I would get there 5 minutes late. I was grief is exhausting. I was tired all the time, so I would sleep through the sermon, and then I would leave 5 minutes early. But I felt a little bit good that at least I'd done something. I'd got out the house and I'd been around people who would actually accept me and not judge me for doing that. So what is the equivalent of that in terms of community? What is a safe space for you to take, not to have to leave your grief at the door, but take it in with you, and for people to just be able to say, allow you to navigate that, but don't cut off yourself from the people around you. So I think those are probably three things I'd immediately say that can just help in those moment by moments. I think maybe the fourth one is be very careful on social media, because I think that the world now is we're sharing so much sad news that can also compound our sense of loss, because we can begin to feel in despair. And social media is just not a real place. So careful how you express your own grief on social media. Rather look for real contact with people than try and kind of run your grief therapy through Facebook. That's not to say you have to cut off yourself, but don't just think about how you do those things in a way that is going to be healthy and helpful for you.
Tim's two books, his first one, Grief and Grace, Facing the Future I Didn't Choose, is available online. Yeah. Have a look and you'll find it somewhere. And his new book...
I'll give I have a website.
Go for it. So what's your website,
griefandgrace.org. And everything I've written or spoken about in terms of grief is on that website in terms of the links for the books and so on. So griefandgrace.org. And it's a good way if you want to find me as well. You can find me through that website.
And his new book, which again is available from his website, is Finding Life After Death, A Biblical Survivor's Guide. Tim, it's been a joy to meet you, because I'm shocked that our paths haven't crossed before, because you know a lot of people I do, and this interview happened because of somebody that I know and you know. Thanks for being so honest, because we know that it's going to really encourage so many people. God bless you.
Thanks, Gareth.
And love to the family.
Thanks so much.